Hey guys, it's me, Melissa. Today, this video, we're going to talk about something that I think is super important. Different attachment styles, as far as like my own journey in life is concerned, I was able to really find a place in my life where I was like super happy. I was so content. I was so peaceful. Like my life just felt so good and I was happy in every aspect of my life except for the one aspect that seemed to elude me was romantic relationships. And so that's something that I kind of dove into. And to be honest with you, I'm going to talk more about, my own journey so that you can see some of the patterns that I picked up on my own life, like what's led me to this and got me to, all the different things that I'm going to be having on this channel. But, just as a brief intervene into that, like that kind of got me onto this is not even that long ago, I was in it, I guess you would call it a relationship with someone, and it was a very intense connection between the two of us that lasted for over a long period of time, but it was always like in and out, together not together, like that kind of thing. And it ended like, and the last time that I was with him, I honestly, I don't even really know what happened. Like, we didn't get in a fight. We weren't angry with each other. It was just like, it was like a really good space that we were in. And then, the next day, I'm texting him and he texts me back, but it kind of led into this whole thing where, it just seemed like he was always busy doing something, whatever. And then less than 6 months later, he at some point he would not respond to me, and then less than 6 months later, he's engaged to someone else. And so, I know there's videos out there who will say, oh well, when a man finds the right woman, but the reality of that is when you look back into people's relationship history, most guys who have a history of, not having something work don't just magically meet someone and change their behaviors and heal themselves completely in less than 6 months and change into some new person, right? And we're not even just talking about men, that's women too, right? Like the reason that these things happen, and this is, just be upfront with it is like, if you're having a lot of relationships where you're not having success, you haven't found that person, and even in relationships that you are married, like you can still not be fulfilled. Like we see videos of that all the time where people are cheating or women are saying they're not fulfilled or any number of things when it comes to relationships, right? And so it's not just that, but like if you're unhappy in your relationship, if you're not completely fulfilled, if you're not having success in relationships, the only truth there is to see is you are the common denominator, right? And I'm not saying that like in a judgmental or mean way, and I'm saying that completely, looking at myself. But it always takes two. Like there's no one person that caused the whole demise of something, right? There's something that led up to that. And I don't need everybody like in the comments, going there being triggered by, the things that I'm saying. If you don't agree, that's okay. Like I'm not the master of, anything. I say that all the time. Like I'm just here sharing my journey and what I've come to know as truth for me. And so if you don't agree with that, that's okay. We don't have to. But moving on, I think, so through the course of that, when I'm like, okay, well, what is happening? And as I think all human nature, we're like, okay, well, what is happening then? Like, what is going on? And so, like, it's natural for us to be like, oh, it's the other person's fault. And we see that all the time, like on social media, where people want to go on and they want to say how terrible and awful the other person was. But the reality of that is like you stayed in it or you brought your own baggage, right? Like, again, it takes two people. And so, of course, we want to blame the other person. And so we're constantly looking, what's wrong with that person, right? And so, I kind of did a deep dive, right? And I found the attachment theory, which was something that I had actually experienced, before, but kind of like it resurfaced for me in a new way. And it just really seemed to click. And when I had found it before, it didn't click for me that it was also me. I was only wanting to look at that other person because, that's what our ego does, right? It tries to protect us and defend us. And so in our mind, we create this narrative where that other person is the evil person and we're the good person and we were just, taken advantage of, or whatever the narrative that we create for ourselves is, right? But in all reality, it takes two. And so in that moment when I'm researching this, he actually was mirroring to me my own problems. I don't even want to say problems, but my own attachment style, right? So from my observations, I would consider him to be a fearful avoidant. And when I'm looking into this, as I'm, researching all the things, I'm like, oh my God, that's me. I do that. And it's in such a subconscious way that you don't even realize what you're doing or why you're doing it or how you're doing it, or that you're even showing up in that way. Because I'm 43 years old, didn't realize that this was even a thing, or that I was doing any of this. We get in this headspace where, we just haven't found the right person, or it's the other person, any number of things that we can tell ourselves. But the reality is, there are 4 main attachment styles. And so there's fearful avoidant, or otherwise known as disorganized attachment style. There's dismissive avoidant. There's anxious attachment style, and secure, which obviously all of us want to lean secure. That's the goal, right? And to show up in relationships that way. The reality that I had to come to face is that was not me. And I think, for a lot of people, it's not. And a lot of times it's things that we pick up in childhood. And so it's, we learn how to manage love or relationships based on what we see as a child coming up, and not even necessarily always, just as a child, but you can be in relationships with people that kind of reinforce what you've already come to believe. And so fearful avoidants are rooted in a core contradiction, right? Where they deeply crave connection, like deep connection with other people, and yet also deeply fear it at the same time. Like it's very dangerous, right? So a lot of times for people who are fearful avoidant, like as a child, like there could have been some really great times where love seemed like such an amazing thing, and then other times where it seemed very dangerous. And so it's kind of like that internal subconscious belief that you internalize and you carry with you, not even knowing, what you're doing. And so there will be videos on all of them. Today we're just going to focus on the fearful avoidant or disorganized attachment style. And yeah, it's just really rooted in that, but there is so much more to it. And I really want to get into a lot of the different details of it, because I think it, just by saying that, like if you were to say to me, it's just a attachment style rooted in, where you really desire deep core connection with people and you also fear it at the same time, I would have been like, oh no, that's not me. Right? And so I think it's important to get into the details of that, and not just the fears, but what does that look like? Like, what are some things that, people do in relationships? How do they show up? So that you can hopefully look at that and be like, oh, be open with yourself and say, oh, that actually might be me. Because it's such deep ingrained fears that you really have to face head on so that you can quit showing up in relationships like that. Because I don't want to continue to keep having relationships that are unsuccessful, and I'm quite sure you don't either. And so we're just going to kind of dive into that today. There's a lot of fears. For fearful avoidance, I feel like is the most complex attachment style. And, honestly, it's a really sad way of going through life when you're unaware of what you're doing, because the thing that you want the most in the world, which is that deep connection to someone, you also fear so much that it's almost like your nervous system won't allow you to have it. And it's not a conscious choice that you make when you're pushing that away. It's narratives that you create in your head that feel so concrete to you. Like, this is just not my person, and that's okay. And you move on, when really, like, there's a lot of fears behind that are creating that thing that feels normal to you. And so I want to, get into, some of those fears, because there are quite a few of them. And a lot of these will overlap. So, the fear of rejection and abandonment, I think, is, a pretty consistent one when you have an insecure attachment. you're just afraid that if someone truly gets to know you, that they'll leave, right? And so, a lot of what we harbor just in general growing up is we are born whole, right? And then we take on all this conditioning from our parents, our family, school, friends, church, everywhere that teach us, like kind of who we should be. And so it's kind of like if you watch the, intro video, it's like, just shedding all of that old stuff, right? But, we learn early on like who to be in order to, to be able to be successful in life, or, just to make it through, right? And so a lot of us do have a very insecure attachment where we feel like there is some, like, we have too much fault, we are unlovable, we're broken in some way. We have, just if people really knew, if they really saw who we were, that they would leave. And again, had you asked me if that was me, I would have said no. And so I think it's important to hang on through these videos and really give them a chance as you're watching them to really dive into it, because we're going to get there, and you want to be able to know which one you are, so that if you are insecurely attached, that you can learn how to process that and be having, more successful relationships. And it's not just romantic relationships. Sometimes this can, your attachment style can overlap into friendships, into, coworkers, all of the kinds of things. And in order to have successful relationships, you want to understand what are those underlying fears that are actually kind of like inadvertently controlling your life, right? And so, of course, there's the fear of rejection and abandonment, which a lot of the insecure attachments carry. There's the fear of intimacy and vulnerability for a fearful avoidant. It's like closeness actually equals danger. It's like you're again, it's not like consciously like I'm handing over my power to you, right? But it feels like when you go there and you're like allowing yourself to be that close to somebody, and you're opening up to them, you're telling them, intimate details about yourself, like it's almost like you're giving your power to that person to hurt you, which can trigger a deep fear for a fearful avoidant. And a lot of times what will end up happening is that person can self-sabotage and end it first, so that they aren't hurt in the end, even though they still really are, because the relationship ends, but they feel like they have some sense of control in that, right? Another fear is fear of engulfment and the loss of autonomy. And sometimes it can show up as feeling trapped or uncomfortable when you're in that closeness with somebody. So getting close will lead to a loss of independence, control, self-identity. And again, if you had asked me, I don't know that I would have said that was me, but it can also be like, this deep entanglement that you have with a parent when you're young, that it's almost like you lose your sense of boundaries. So if you were somebody who grew up and you didn't have like a lot of boundaries, like as an adult, you're learning how to create more boundaries, then that could be you, right? So that is, now I'm like so hyper independent that it is hard for, like, I always thought, oh, I'm just, that really independent woman. My dad would always say, oh, make sure that, you go out and you take care of yourself, because you can't rely on a man. And so I thought it was these other things that were ingrained in me, when really I had this fear of loss of, autonomy. Like I would overfunction when I get in a relationship at the beginning and kind of intertwine myself, probably more than I should with that person. And then all of a sudden, here I am not doing the things that I normally would be doing. And then I start to feel like I'm losing myself. And then that fear kicks in. And then I'm like, oh, I don't like this, right? When really it was a lot of me. It wasn't that other person. It was just fears that were being triggered in me that I was unaware of. And, like sometimes people, like, when they're feeling that closeness, like when you're getting close to them, like you're sitting on the couch, you're like cuddling, and that can make somebody, that doesn't necessarily apply to me, but can make somebody feel trapped. Like if you're laying on them, that could also trigger that. for some people. And so this will show up differently in different people. Not every fearful avoidant is going to have the same exact thing. So like when I was with that person, I would lay my legs on him. Well, he would get up and leave, and I'd be like, well, I don't understand what's happening. Like, why are you leaving? Well, he felt trapped, which for a fearful avoidant is that fear is being triggered, right? But it showed up differently for him than it would show up for me. And so I just want to make that clear. Not every single one of these things has to apply. It can show up very differently from one person to another. That's why I really encourage you to sit through all of the videos of all the attachment styles and really try and, figure out how it applies to you. You can lean, into two of them. It doesn't have to just be one, but it's just really digging deep to find out, which of these fears applies to you. Which of these things are you doing? How are you showing up in relationships in order to be able to, get to that place where you're able to have a successful one, right? Another fear for a fearful avoidant can be the fear of being a burden, which, more recently I had an experience with my daughter where she actually told me this. Like, she's like, well, you're always paying for stuff and you're doing all these things because you think that you have to buy or earn my love, which I didn't actually, that was not my perception of why I was doing it. I guess I told myself, my narrative was like, I'm being a good mom, right? And then it really made it clear for me. And so sometimes it's really good to have, the deep conversations with people because it can, mirror to you like some of these things that you're doing, right? And she would say like, oh, well, you're always reminding me. I'm reminding you of it because I can't even defend it. Like before, I feel like I had a whole story of why I did those things. And it felt just very normal and like comfortable for me, the story that I created. Now it's kind of like, oh yeah, I do think I am a burden and I don't want, like, I have to buy people's love, right? And so that can be some wounding for people. Like if you look closely at it and you really dig through the narrative of why am I really doing the things that I'm doing. But it's also like denying your needs, your feelings, or your true self because you just feel like you're too much for people. I mean, a lot of times in fearful avoidance, it can be those people who don't ask for help, refuse to ask for help, very self-reliant. And that can also go over into dismissive avoidant, which we'll talk about later. But, it's kind of suppressing those things and because you think you're too much. And so it's like you downplay all of that stuff. Like, someone wants to, oh, you're always fine. It's okay. All of those kinds of things because you don't want to be a burden to people. And I mean, that can play out in lots of relationships. More recently, I have been visiting my cousins and I never asked them to come visit them because I didn't think that they, would want me to come stay there and have to entertain me and all of these kinds of things. And I realized, oh my gosh, that's me. I'm making myself the burden, right? Because here my cousins are acting like they really wanted me to come. I'm going to visit my cousin, who lives close to New York City. She seems like she's very excited about it. She's asking me all these things. And here I am like not taking advantage of, going on these trips to see my family because I actually have this fear of being a burden. And so I just want to overlay like how that can, apply to lots of different relationships. It doesn't just have to be romantic, and how this can really increase the value of your life by dealing with these fears, regardless whether it's romantic or otherwise, right? And then another fear, kind of the last one that we're going to kind of hit on is the fear of failure, where you just believe that you are flawed and unable to have a successful relationship, wanting a partner. And it's also like wanting a partner to read your mind while suppressing your needs, kind of goes in with some of those things too, because it's like we expect somebody to meet our needs even though we're suppressing them. So how could they ever know what our needs are? Like, we're not very good at saying, hey, these are my needs. You're not meeting them, or whatever, with addressing your needs at all, because you don't want to be a burden. Like, they kind of overlap into each other. But, the fear of failure, like not having a successful relationship, after so long of being a fearful avoidant, and these constant fears are being triggered and brought up, and ruining relationships, you know, you start to believe that you're just incapable of having a successful relationship. And so that's you. I hope that you find this video and that you can figure out, you know, which of these fears, if all of them or whichever ones, you know, that you can really work through them and deal with them so that you can actually have a very successful relationship, because all of us are capable of having a successful relationship if we're willing to do the work, right? And I know there are a lot of videos out there that say, you know, just stay away from fearful avoidance, and, you know, like if you meet one of them, just keep moving because it's not worth it. And while that can be true, because I don't want anybody to ever stay in a relationship where you're not getting your needs met, you know, you're getting breadcrumbed, any of those kinds of things, which can very much feel like being with a fearful avoidant. If that person can be aware of their fears and, you know, some of this dysfunction, right, that's created in their life, stopping them from having this successful relationship, if they're willing to do the work, like I am, and I know, you know, there's other fearful avoidants who are able to overcome this, right? Like that's not always the case. And if you are a fearful avoidant and you've seen those videos, that is not true. Because if you can find the awareness, which is always the key of anything, and then you can do the work and work through it, like you are more than capable of having a successful relationship, right? And, you know, one of the key things, like if you are a fearful avoidant, when you notice yourself pulling back just as things get close, it's often your nervous system trying to shield you from those fears. So it's essentially like, I don't want to say it's not your fault, right? Like, because the reality of it is if we knew why this was happening every time we were in a relationship, this wouldn't be the case, right? But we're unaware. And the reality is it's your nervous system that's actually hijacking your body. And so because that fear is unconscious, like, you know, it's in your subconscious, it's not something that you're aware of, that's being brought up, like in that moment, you just feel this panic. You have this defense system inside your body that's like, oh my God, alert, alert, this is dangerous, get away, even though that's not what you're consciously thinking, right? But it is your nervous system just hijacks you so you can feel this sense of panic, you know, sweat, whatever, where your body just feels like, oh my gosh, you got to get out of here. And so becoming aware, like I actually work with a client in my business where we're working through some shadow work, and part of it is like I do cranial sacral work while we're doing that to calm his nervous system. And because it is essentially like your nervous system is just hijacking you. And when we discuss through like, okay, well, do you understand when this is happening, and how does that feel in your body? And, you know, he'll say that his chest gets tight and his head feels like it's going to explode. So I think it's really important to identify, like, once you are aware that this is something that happens with you, that you take inventory of that. And so when you do become in these situations, like, where do you feel it in your body? Oh, now you can identify, okay, it's just my nervous system hijacking me right now. So I'm feeling that tightness in my chest. I'm feeling like my head's going to explode. This actually might not be the other person sitting across from me, because he's actually been with somebody for, you know, like more than 20 years. And he notices that this happens, and his automatic response is it's her creating this in him. And it's actually not. It's just your nervous system is hijacking your body at that moment, because an old fear, one of these fears that, you know, we just addressed, is getting triggered in that moment. And that could be from something that happened in childhood, where now they're doing something that's triggering that old fear, right? It's not actually, maybe it's not even them. And so you want to just be clear about what happens in your body in that moment, or where are you experiencing it. And in that moment, it's kind of important, you know, like, so what I tell him is, you know, try and stay in that moment a little longer. Or if you really feel like you just can't, then tell your partner, like, oh, you know what, my nervous system is just like really out of control right now. I'm gonna need 10 minutes or whatever it is that you think you need. And then you go have that time to like recalm yourself down and then come back to that moment. But you don't want to just keep avoiding the conflict, because, you know, conflict is something else that avoidance it triggers that fear because they feel like once that conflict happens, oh, the relationship's over, right? And so they try to avoid conflict. They can become people pleasers sometimes, things like that. And you really just want to make sure that you're staying in it. You want to address that issue that's happening with your partner. It needs to be dealt with. Like, you can't just keep going through a relationship without, doing it, like running away and then coming back and acting as if nothing happened, right? That's not going to get you anywhere healthy. And so taking the time that you need and, either trying to stay a little bit longer in it, asking for the time that you need to calm yourself down and come back to whatever it is that needs to happen. And he's actually been quite successful with that, where he has stayed in it, where normally, he would have left and he would have been gone all night sometimes, where he was able to stay in it. And both sides, you notice, like, when you change how you're showing up, other people will change how they're showing up. And so his partner was showing up very differently too, where he was like, oh, I can definitely tell, like, she was trying to, stay calmer in that situation as well. And so that's how you build trust in the relationship, when you're not constantly running away and you're staying in it, and your partner will definitely should be showing up differently too, because now you are as well. And I just think, like, you can be successful. I've seen so much success with, working through this with him. It can also be like somebody, even just like trips can feel very intimate for a fearful avoidant or dismissive avoidant sometimes, where, they don't want, that's too intense. Like, maybe if it's with, friends, a bunch of friends, and you're going, but when it's just you and your partner, then it starts to feel too intense. Starts to feel too intimate for that person. And of the 20 years, I think I was told that I think they did like maybe two, like just overnight, one night, in that whole amount of time that they were together, right? And recently they went and did this, and they actually had a lot of fun, because they're having a lot of breakthroughs, with dealing with some of this kind of stuff. And they were able to show up for themselves, which is, super exciting. And the reason I'm sharing this is just to show you, like, it's very possible for you to work through your stuff and, to find those wins and be successful. Is it going to be uncomfortable? Absolutely. Is it going to take work? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, you want to be happy. You want to have peace. You want to have good relationships with people. And so it's always worth it. I want to get into some of these other things where, it's kind of like, what does this look like? Like, what are some of the behaviors that show up when you are fearful avoidant, so that you're able to identify some of these patterns better? And so one of those is picking at minor details. So you could be, and I noticed this in myself, which I did not realize that was part of this, right? And I didn't even know why I did it. But I was like, oh my God, like, you wear those shoes? And I feel bad saying that, but it's just real. I'm here to be real. I'm here to help people. And so if it's real, I'm going to say it. Even if maybe it doesn't make me look like the best person, that's okay. I'm totally fine with it. But, or it doesn't have to be their shoes. It could be their habits. It's whatever, like, it's just a classic deactivation strategy, where it's an unconscious defense mechanism to manufacture emotional distance. Like, you're feeling too intense, and so you say these things to try and gain a sense of control back when that intimacy just feels too overwhelming. And so if you were to ask me why I said that, I mean, I feel bad that I said it now, and I don't even know why I said it in the moment. But again, these are subconscious things that are happening. It's like our nervous system is just hijacking us, because that fear is being triggered, and it's so intense inside your body, even though you don't know that's happening, that, these are some of the behaviors that we'll see. Another one would be, we can create phantom X's or flaws, where, like, if you're, looking at their flaws, it could be how they chew, how they dress, just fixating on neutral traits. And again, like, you're not even sure why you're even doing this. I mean, in the moment, it feels natural, like, you just don't like how they chew. And, oh, that's a deal breaker, right? But if you're aware of your attachment style, now you can look at it and be like, is it really that? Or is it my nervous system is hijacking me in the moment because of the fears that I'm holding. And the other thing is, comparing an idealized partner from the past, right? Like, we're always with people and we can idealize them after the fact, after they're gone, and we don't have to deal with them anymore. And that can be a deactivation strategy as well, even though, like, at the time, you didn't even like that person when you were with them, right? Sudden coldness after high intimacy. So acting super affectionate that night and then very distant or busy or dismissive the next morning to kind of reset that boundary, which would be one that I experienced with, my ex-partner, where he would just be very affectionate. We would be intimate. He would hold me all through the night, and then, he would open up to me and, share things with me, and I would bring it up and say, oh my God, it felt so good. He would agree, but then it was like that triggered that deep fear in him, and then he had to run. So, like, anytime I would text him, he would be busy, he would be doing something. It's that deactivation strategy again. And I'm just trying to use these real life scenarios because, again, like, just because it doesn't show up for one person and it shows up for someone else doesn't mean that you're not fearful avoidant. So don't, check every box to make sure, oh, yes, that I am this or I'm not this. I mean, just try to be honest with yourself and open to really seeing, your own behaviors, whether you like them or not, right? Testing the partner, dropping subtle hints or pulling away to see if that partner will chase after you. And for a fearful avoidant, like, they could just be testing to see if you care because, again, they have that deep wounding where they feel unlovable and they feel like at some point you're gonna leave, you're gonna find out who they are, and, that you're gonna abandon or reject them. And so, it could be that testing. Nitpicking and deflecting personal vulnerability by constantly highlighting a partner's mistakes or flaws to maintain the upper hand. So if you find yourself constantly bringing up, mistakes that they've made in the past, trying to keep that upper hand, right? Like, it's like, okay, I gotta have some sense of control here. I know I'm gonna make them feel like they're a little bit less, so that way I can position myself a little higher to make sure that they won't leave me. And again, we're going to get into other attachment styles, and sometimes it can appear as somebody's trying to be controlling. And in a sense, it is controlling, right? It is manipulative, it is controlling, but not in the sense that they're trying to manipulate or control you. It's a subconscious pattern that they're trying to create a safe space for themselves. They don't want to be abandoned or rejected, and so they will subconsciously do these behaviors to create that safe space for themselves, not because they're intentionally trying to manipulate or control you. And don't get that twisted, because if you are with a narcissistic person, that's a whole different thing. I'm not saying that you should ever stay with somebody like that. And sometimes some of these patterns can come up and appear to be narcissistic a little bit. And so that's something that you have to, really search through and decide for yourself. And again, if you're with somebody who's not willing to acknowledge the patterns or do the work, I highly suggest getting out of that relationship anyways, whether it's, an avoidant or it's a narcissistic person or whatever the case may be. Just to be very clear about that. Preemptive sabotage, instigating arguments out of nowhere. Like, you're having a great time out of nowhere. Now that here's this argument when things are going really well. You're like, what the hell just happened? Like, everything was going really good, and how are we fighting now? Well, again, it's that nervous system trying to hijack you, manufacturing a crisis or to create a reason, to get out of that situation before you get hurt. A lot of times you will see avoidance where it's very confusing, where you're with them and you're like, oh my God, everything was going great. How are we in the spot now? And that's been the case, for not even just this last person, but the person before. Because again, when you have an insecure attachment, especially like if you've grown up with emotionally unavailable parents specifically, you're of course going to be insecurely attached, most likely. And, you're kind of taking on that. And so you're also drawn to people who are not emotionally there for you as well, because your parents were. That feels normal to your nervous system, right? And so it's to get out and get, before you get hurt. But it's very confusing because I had an ex before that where every time it was like everything was going great. There was no fight. There was no nothing. It was like the pinnacle of like the experience of our relationship. And next thing you know, gone. So, it's very confusing. And I think this can bring peace to people too. So like if you're with somebody like this and they break up with you, and a lot of times relationships like are very hard to get over and they can break you. And I think this is very like therapeutic to understand, like that person didn't, it's not anything to do with you. It's nothing connected to your worth. It's just they are not a good container for what you're bringing to the table, right? Because they can't handle it. Their container just is incapable of holding all that you are bringing. And so they run, and that's a huge thing. It's a very push and pull. A lot of times it's a push-pull dynamic unless you have somebody. I mean, there is this whole dynamic where you can be, fearful avoidance and anxious attachments will get together. Anxious attachments they're always leaning in, they're pushing in, and they'll downplay their needs. They'll push them down. They'll act like they're always trying to be the peacemaker. They're trying to make you happy. And so sometimes that can lead to, a longer-term relationship with a fearful avoidant and someone, an anxious attachment person. But in the end, long term, it's always going to end up with resentment and bitterness because you're never going to get your needs met. You always should show up in a relationship with expressing your needs and desires and never selling yourself short for the other person, because if they're not meeting your needs at the beginning and they're not showing up into their full potential, it's only going to lead to anger and bitterness and resentment. And so I think that's always something to keep in mind. But it's just, fearful avoidance, their brain anticipates danger from the person that you want close, and it's not their fault. And I think this can bring compassion to understanding that it's not about your worth, but at the same time, don't stay in it with somebody who's not willing to do the work in any attachment style, right? But some of the other things that you're going to see besides, so we talked about preemptive sabotage, where they create the crisis to get out because they just fear being hurt. That fear overtakes the desire to be close to you. Extreme overfunctioning followed by ghosting, which is kind of what we've already talked about, where they're the ones who initiate that intense closeness, only then to be, leave because feelings got too strong. Again, it's that push-pull, rapid shifts between emotional need and cold detachment. It's like, I really want you close, but I don't trust you. And so, because that's what, you say to yourself, but it's because fearful avoidants believe that they're unlovable with a deep suspicion that others are going to hurt or betray them. And this isn't something that you're going to be able to love out of them. Believe me, I've tried. It's something that, they really have to be willing to acknowledge their patterns and be willing to do the work for any relationship to be happy and healthy and successful. So just keep that in mind when you're going through this. And then, you also see chronic relational fatigue. If you're feeling constantly exhausted by relationships, believing that, true safety only exists alone, but still desperately longing for a partner, that could be you. Some of the relationship history could be a pattern of hot and cold exes, could be a history of volatile, highly passionate but unstable relationships instead of calm, long-term relationships. We all want to be in calm, long-term relationships, but when you have an insecure attachment, sometimes that feels very boring. And so that's the other thing that we'll see is difficulty harboring safe intimacy, because being with somebody who feels safe and predictable and secure feels boring. You're drawn to those intensely, emotional, volatile, passionate relationships where people are emotionally unavailable, kind of like what we talked about, right? Where, if you grow up with emotionally unavailable parents, as I did, of course you're going to feel insecurely attached. That's what's being modeled to you. And so if emotional availability isn't there, what feels normal to you and your nervous system is emotional unavailability. And it's also a deeper wounding where, you know, psychologically we'll think that if we draw in this partner that's emotionally unavailable as well, that somehow we can fix what we didn't fix in our childhood. And again, that's not a healthy dynamic to be in. So it's just being really open and honest with yourself, looking for the patterns. Does any of this sound like you? I mean, there's always going to be more to this. We're not going to go on and on forever. But hopefully this gave you enough information that, you know, it can help you understand if this is you, or maybe you're in a relationship like this. Or I think it's also very helpful in understanding the people around you as well, like whether it's friends or family or anybody else. It doesn't have to be a romantic partner, because, you know, when you have two conflicting people who are trying to meet in the middle. So like fearful avoidant will essentially, if you pull away, they'll push in because they have that fear of abandonment. They don't want to be abandoned. And so they'll push in. And I, you know, that was the experience I had with, you know, the last person that I was with. He would push in and then it would try and draw me back in, right? And then he would push out because now I'm pushing in. And it's just that push and pull. And actually, I'm fairly certain my daughter probably is fearful avoidant as well. And so like we'll get in an argument. I want to clear it up right away because I feel uncomfortable with that conflict. I don't want to be abandoned or rejected. And so I will push into her and she will just pull, you know, way out, and nothing really gets accomplished. Where I've learned that if I just let it be and wait for a little bit till she can calm her nervous system back down, and then we can, you know, meet more in the middle, that it works out much better. And so there's lots of dynamics in our lives that this information is super important to understand, and it can just make every single connection that you have in your life so much better if you just really understand the different attachment styles. So that's why I'm making all these videos. I'll be making the next one probably about dismissive avoidance, and then anxious attachment, and then probably, you know, secure, just so we know what are we trying to accomplish, what's the end goal, right? And just understanding all of this, I think, will really help you. And it's important to identify those fears that are subconscious to you so that you can deal with them and manage them and, you know, come out in a better place so that those are not ruling your entire life. And I hope that you found all of this super useful, and I will see you in the next video.